Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us in what is our last webcast of the 2016-2017 school year. I'm here with Director of Education John Malloy and Chair Robin Pilkey for our final webcast, answering your questions. Anything you want to talk about, you can actually start answering or asking your questions right now. Don't answer them yet. We are going to take your questions. Just a few notes before we start. Of note, if you have any personal or very specific questions, just keep in mind that we may not be able to answer those during the webcast, but of course we'd encourage you to contact your teacher, principal, superintendent to follow up if you have any concerns. Also, we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. We don't always have time, and sometimes we'll combo questions if we're getting multiple questions about the same topic. We'll try to just answer one to give everyone the opportunity to have their question asked. We'll be getting to Chair Robin Pilkey and Director of Education John Malloy in a second, but again, if you'd like to start getting your questions in, you can simply type them here on your screen and start getting them in the queue right now, and we'll get to them as soon as possible. Without further ado, we'll get underway. We'll start with a few opening remarks from Robin. Robin?
Thank you very much, Ryan. And thank you for joining us for this evening for the final webcast for the 2016-2017 school year. Webcasts have continued to be an excellent opportunity for us to hear directly from you, and we have addressed a variety of topics this year. As we approach the last few weeks of school, I wanted to reflect on some of the work we have done this year to support students, families, and schools. We were very pleased to begin the school year with the appointment of Dr. John Malloy as our permanent Director of Education at the TDSB. As trustees, we value working with him to ensure policies, programs, and supports are aligned to ensure the well-being and achievement of students. Equity is a critical focus for this year. We are committed to continuing to face and address difficult and complex issues around discrimination and racism within our system. The consultations we've had with students, parents, and community members have been extremely important, and I want to thank all of you who have participated in those evenings. This evening, we have not set a specific topic for discussion, but we're looking for you to guide us. Dr. Malloy and I are here to answer any of your questions as we approach the end of the school year. Parent involvement is very important, and we appreciate all the time you take in our schools.
Thank you, Robin. John, did you want to say a few words before we get started?
Thanks, Ryan. It truly is a privilege to be here with all of you, with our chair, and of course you as well, Ryan, as we bring our webinars to a close for this school year. In some ways, it's hard to believe that it's already June. It's been a great year in many ways. We've learned a lot. We've worked hard together. Certainly partnering with our parents to serve our students, your children, is top of mind. And hopefully this night we can answer your questions and continue the work moving forward. A couple of reflections I'd like to offer, though, are we continue to focus on creating effective learning communities in every school. And the way in which we're doing that is through a concept of shared leadership where every voice matters. That continues to be our focus. That continues to be how we are supporting our schools. And what we're intending is that we truly support each and every school to improve in three clear areas: achievement, well-being, and equity. And that has been our work for the last year. It will continue to be our work moving into next year. But I'd like to add that as any learning organization, as we continue to do the work, we learn new insights that we wish to apply, that we wish to support. And one of the most important insights we've learned is that it is very important for the Toronto District School Board to create a really effective direction for the entire system so that we can create conditions throughout the entire system and that we can align our resources to support this direction. But what is becoming ever more clear is how important the work that happens in classrooms and schools in communities actually is. That's where the important work happens. And we've been thinking a lot as a team about the whole concept of each community, everyone, every day. And what it means is that we support our school communities to know our students in that school, to know our families in the broader community, and to respond effectively, to understand each other as the staff in that community. So in other words, what I'm suggesting is real change happens, real transformation takes place when we support communities where the relationships are. So the system has a significant role to play. The senior team working with the board to implement the board's direction is key. But what we continue to strive for is supporting our schools to be effective, to be excellent, working collaboratively together to serve our students. So that's our goal. That's where we've been. That's where we are going to continue to move. And as the chair said, lots of work still to be done in terms of issues like equity, but we're committed to it.
Absolutely.
Thank you, John. We are now taking your questions. They're already starting to come in, but please do ask away, and we will try to get your question in the queue as fast as possible. Our first question comes from Donna. Can the TDSB provide education for the students while the teachers have staff meetings? There is less and less teaching time as the school has assemblies to allow teachers prep time. Can school councils provide learning opportunities when staff want breaks? I guess, John, there's a required amount of time that they have to be in the classroom.
Interesting question, though.
I think it's an important question because what we're trying to balance is providing the right supports for our staff to provide the effective programs for our students while not in any way harming the learning time for students. So it's a balance. And some of the things that I think are important to consider is we know that when a staff has some opportunities to come together, to challenge each other, to work with one another, to support each other, that confidence grows and practice improves. We know that. However, we also know that when our teachers are away from classrooms, that doesn't always help our students. So I want to just communicate as clearly as I can that we're aware of this. We try to balance this, and we try to work on strategies supported by our principals and our teams where the learning opportunities that students engage in when staff is learning are actually effective ones. So it's an important question, one that we continue to work towards and will continue to do so.
Thank you for that question, Donna. Robin, are you getting a lot of questions, and you and other trustees, is there something close to the end of the year that you tend to hear from parents?
They ask about the heat, obviously.
Yeah, and I think that today,
You know,
well, let's
today
talk
would be
about
a
that one
perfect
because
example. I think it was 36 at one
Yes.
point, so that would make it quite a bit warmer in some of our schools.
you know, well then let's use that as a jumping off point. I know heat, especially today, it's the hottest day of the year so far. You know, mid-30s at least with the humidity.
Absolutely.
You know, we've talked about this before, but I know our staff do as the very best we can to make sure that students, you know, if they're in gym, maybe gym's not as strenuous, move classrooms where possible, use fans, open windows. We know it's uncomfortable, especially when you get in some of those third floor schools. It does get warm. But there's something that's come to board as well more recently that we're going to try to start putting in cooling zones in schools.
Starting with elementary schools, and there's a pilot project starting for this year, and I can't remember how many schools are in it. but
About
it's-
6, I believe,
Yeah,
to start, and
then next it's being rolled out over time. There's a number of schools on the list, and the report is actually with the details available online.
because right now we have about 125 schools with full air conditioning, and the fact is the remaining does have varying degrees of it. We realize that you know, obviously we'd love to put air conditioning in all of our schools, but in this case it's about putting cooling units in like a central position, maybe a gym, for example.
Right.
To just make it that much cooler so that students can rotate through. So, you know, I think that's important news on a day like this.
But we're also spending other money on the physical plant, so to speak, and things like new windows and things like that. Even though they aren't air conditioning, they will help as we start to get rid of single pane windows and things like that. That makes a big difference, and improving the roofs in the schools and things like that will also actually help the heat in the schools.
Yeah, hopefully including this room. All right, well, we are taking your questions. Again, please feel free to ask questions below, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Next up from Stephanie says, our school community was not engaged in the recent decision regarding administration at our school. We had no choice in the selection for our new principal and are now going to be faced with a principal that has been absent a majority of the school year and a new vice principal due to a well-deserved promotion. What needs to happen to have our vice principal promoted within our school? This is a very detail-oriented process.
So I think it's important because we have 584 schools and we are working with 584 communities, there's a really important process that exists each year. So it is the board's expectation that there be a school statement of need that is created by each local school community. So we expect our parents' voice to influence that. Certainly our trustee is involved, our superintendent. And what the purpose is to determine what kind of leadership is required at this time for your school. And that becomes the very significant starting point that superintendents use to work through a very complex process that tries to bring together the needs of our school, the needs of our system, as well as the individual requests or concerns that our principals and vice principals bring. So it's a very complex process, one that we take a lot of care to put forward. We understand that sometimes people have personal reflections about an individual. They might really appreciate an individual and want that person to stay. They might feel that the school requires a different individual. And I hope that all of our communities understand that we have to deal with this matter exceptionally sensitively, especially since we're dealing with people's careers and people's contributions. And again, we're all in this work to support students and our school communities. So in essence, our parents do not choose the principal or the vice principal for a particular school. That is something I need to be clear about. But we do want to be sure that we understand the concerns that parents bring forward, the needs that the school has. And one of the things that I ask of all of our superintendents is be in close touch with our parent community so that our parents understand why, if there is a move at a school, the particular person that's moving there can truly reflect what the school has basically suggested in that school statement of need. So that's the process.
Can I add something to that? The
Sure.
school statement of need is completed by the parents. You've often done at the beginning of the school year in the school council, with the school council leading that. And if you are interested in that, you should work with your school council to be part of that process. I've done it several times when I was a school council chair. And it really, if you do it well and if you think about it, it can be really helpful both to the superintendent when they're choosing the next principal and also to the school to help them kind of narrow what they're really concerned about in their local community.
Okay, thank you for that question. Next up from Karen, I'm very encouraged by the promise of inclusion in the classroom, inclusion of all, including those with multiple exceptionalities. As Dr. Malloy noted in his video, student output, they're learning in very different ways. How will you begin to drill down into the community classroom to address conventions and change education thinking, including agile thinking and how students express their learning?
How about if I start and
Yeah,
then
I
you
think
can
that's a
jump
good
in?
idea.
So one of the things that we are doing in the Toronto District School Board is starting with the attitudes and the beliefs that we as educators hold individually, as well as then what could emerge collectively in a school community, which would be the culture of that particular school. So we are really looking at that as we move from this year into next year. And part of what we are going to do to strengthen that direction is to support our schools through facilitated conversations regarding what is it that I might need to change in order for my students to succeed even more effectively. Clearly, our commitment to equity and inclusion is front and center in this discussion, because what we know and understand is what I believe, what we believe as educators, will impact the classroom, will impact the opportunities our students have, will impact their success. And we know that that starts with us working with you, our parents and communities, to support our students. So our goal is to ensure that schools have the support they need to think about their students, who's achieving, why might that be the case, who might need different supports to achieve, and how would we provide those? And that will become the focus of our professional learning at school. So when we talk about how will this make it to the classroom, this is going to be the front and center expectation for every school, but what the system is not going to do is tell the school exactly what conversation to have. What I mean by that is we're going to provide the support so that particular staff working with our parents can determine where do we need to focus our energies, why is this the case, and then when we engage in the work of challenging our beliefs, our bias, our values, our attitudes, and that then leads to a change in practice, what impact has that had on our students? We have so much work to do, and we're very willing to admit this as we think about our students with special needs and providing the learning opportunities in the classroom, and that is a commitment that's front and center in our integrated equity framework, which I'm guessing you may be familiar with if you've seen some of the videos and webinars from previously.
Perfect, thank you for that question. Next up from Bill, wanting to know what's being done to get more money to repair and replace schools. Do you want to take that one, Robin?
Oh, well, we have been fortunate, sorry, I'm looking in the wrong place. We have been fortunate in the last couple of years to have gotten quite a bit more money from the province, which has been really helpful. We're continuing to prioritize that money. The staff, you'll notice that many schools in many areas are getting new boilers, they're getting new roofs, they're getting new windows, and a lot of money is going out to do that. Lots of playgrounds also, which is money we never had before to do that. Parking lots, so some people are quite happy. You know, we are looking at, every year we look at, through our long-term planning, we do look at our schools and the enrollment and areas that we may need to look at in more depth. And sometimes, you know, we do close schools or we do consolidate schools, and some of those schools may get sold. They may not get sold either. I mean, we have to make decisions about whether we think we're gonna need those schools in the future. So some of that is what we're doing for that. We are quite dependent on what the provincial government gives us, but in the last few years they have been much more generous than the years before that. Still not enough, but better than it was.
We've been able to move past just the emergency repairs
Absolutely.
and start to get into
years
that.
ago, we would never have done anything to do with a playground or a field. Like, forget it, we would never have had money for that.
And then one of the things that you've mentioned over the months has been education development charges. Is that another
Absolutely.
thing as far as getting into?
Education development charges. For those who don't know, when a condo is built in Toronto, the Catholic School Board receives money from the developer per unit. I think it's about $1,300 per unit, and they can use that money to buy land if they need that for their schools. The Toronto District School Board gets nothing. Presently, the way the regulation is set up, we are unlikely that if in the current form, we would never get money for that. It requires something that we can't do across the board. But it also doesn't recognize that there are areas of the city that, as we know, development is ongoing, enormous, and putting a lot of strain on schools, and we get nothing for that.
And I think the challenge is because the regulation is very literal that if you have excess space, no matter where it might be in the board, that impacts the board's ability to receive those charges,
Absolutely.
even if we have little to no space or frankly diminishing space in some of our more intensely developed neighborhoods.
Like neighborhoods like anything up along the Yonge line or the Bloor line.
Right.
You know, schools are very crowded and need work, and because schools are less crowded in areas even in the outer suburbs, we don't get any money for that.
Right.
And, you know, if you're concerned with that, please talk to your MP.
That's a good point. Mike has a question. There's been lots of discussion about anti-racism training in the TDSB. When will this happen, and will that be for all staff?
So one of the things that we've made a public commitment about is the importance through our integrated equity framework of really, as I said earlier, challenging ourselves as educators first. And when I say the word challenge, I don't mean negatively. I mean, because we want to be effective educators, we want to serve our students well, we want to challenge any beliefs or attitudes that need to be changed. That is our starting place. The challenge, though, is that some of the concerns that exist are hard for us to see. Institutional systemic challenges may even be outside of our grasp unless we really create learning conditions that make us be able to bring about the changes that are required. So we made a commitment that anti-oppression, anti-racism training is foundational to this work. We know that if we create opportunities for our staff to think about these very, very important issues, we can then think about our practice, we can then make the appropriate changes as I suggested. One of the things that becomes a challenge or a complex issue, but we're working it through, is how do we provide that support? So right now, our trustees have already engaged in learning opportunities that will continue. Senior staff has engaged in learning opportunities around anti-oppression, anti-racism training. Our principals and vice principals, because we expect our formal leaders to assist us to create the right conditions in schools, we will be rolling out that plan in the new school year. And one of the things that we've learned is that the best professional learning happens closest to where the work is. So for example, there may be traditions where we bring people out to large settings where we teach certain concepts or bring about shared understanding. The challenge is we've learned, and that's not just Toronto District School Board, that's broadly, that kind of learning can cause some things to happen. For example, we become more aware of an issue, but it doesn't necessarily bring about the kind of transformation that we're speaking about. So we've learned that kind of learning happens best in classrooms, in schools, where staffs support one another. So our plan is to be clear about how all staff are going to engage in this type of discussion and learning as we move into the new year. But I want to be clear that because we have 37,000 staff, the commitment is there. The board has passed direction, and I'll for the chair to comment when I'm finished, that this is what we need to do. We're creating that plan. We're working with partners to make that happen. But we need some time in order for us to ensure that 37,000 people, as I mentioned, have access to this learning opportunity. When we talk about the notion of, will this be expected? One of the things that I think I can say with confidence as I think about educators across our system, we do great work, and I know that we can continue to improve. And all the educators that I have met want to improve. And as long as we create what I call relevant learning opportunities, where it really connects with the work that our educators or our staff members or our administrators are doing each and every day, then that's the type of learning that makes the greatest difference. So again, trustees and senior team, we've already begun. Formal leaders in our system, a very clear process starting in the new school year, and through that process then creating the conditions in each and every school for this learning opportunity to be effective. So more to come on that as we move into the new school year. And maybe, Robin, you have some thoughts about a trustee vision for why we're engaged in this important work.
Well, it is important. I think that because we recognize that across the system, these things have happened over time, and it's important that we take whatever steps and we ensure that staff take steps to change that. I mean, people have been hurt, and that's not appropriate.
And I think the other piece that we've been really clear about is, though we might want to change every challenging situation immediately,
We can't do that.
it doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
Some have said, why don't you just send directions from the central office and expect people to comply? Again, it is our job to create conditions, but this kind of work is much more personal and communal, supported by the system, as I said at the beginning of this webinar. But we know, and we have named, and we're not running away from, the fact that we are not able to, at this moment, effectively serve all of our students. We know that some of our students, we need to basically figure out why is it that they're not achieving, and as I said again earlier, what is it we're going to do about that? The Toronto District School Board is not only naming the concerns, we're engaging in a broad consultation with our community through the Enhancing Equity Task Force. Clearly what's happening is that we all agree that each and every student deserves the environment that honors, supports, and engages them, and that we as educators and staff members have a huge role to play to make that happen. So it's front and center, and the specifics will continue to roll out over the next little while.
Just briefly on that, so you're talking about anti-racism and anti-oppression training, but you've also talked about bias. So it's not as, is there racism out there? Yes.
Yes.
But there's also something, bias, that people may not even realize they have, and it's about acknowledging people's own bias, that they may not realize that they think X about this and Y about this without actually thinking why.
So,
And that actually was part of the training that we did as
Go ahead.
trustees.
Oh, okay.
Like, that was part of the training that we did as trustees. I think what you said, something you said that was interesting, is the reflection that the system, you know, why don't we just say this, everybody should do this? But I think we have to recognize there are 584 schools, and the situation is not the same in every school.
Right.
So to give a big system-wide, we're going to all do this, or we're going to have this, this is what we're going to achieve, it doesn't reflect that in some schools, it might be here, and in some schools, it might need to be up here.
Right.
And which I don't even think I was in the frame anymore, but okay. But I think that's important to recognize that if you're taking it seriously, you need to look at the individual schools and what's important for those
Exactly.
individual schools.
and the system does have clear expectations, though, that every voice matters.
Right.
If we're going to say that, though, it means we're going to challenge the notion of privilege. Whose voice is more influential?
Right.
And how do we create the right space so that all voices have a place? Similarly, our students, who are our most important priority, may not even feel safe to communicate their experiences. We do gather data through our census, through our school climate surveys, but we need to be sure that we're learning directly from them. And what we find is that's the system expectation, that we honor voice, that we want to create those kinds of learning conditions that make the kind of transformation we've been discussing. That's what we expect everybody to engage in. But as the chair said, 584 places are different. So even when we're talking about anti-racism training, it's about ourselves, as I suggested, but it's also about deeply knowing our community. And our communities, as you would know, are unbelievably diverse across the city. And so part of this work is truly knowing our community as well, being impacted and influenced by our communities, and again, creating that opportunity for all voices to have a place at the table.
Great question, Mike. Thank you for that. Next up from Ron, does TDSB have any plans to increase international student enrollment and any limit of percentage for international student enrollment?
So I'll start by saying that we have an international education department. That department is connected globally. We do engage students from across the globe, and we invite them to the Toronto District School Board. We don't have any intention that I would understand from a staff perspective, though I'll look to the chair for a moment if she's heard anything from the trustees, to in any way limit that. But by all means, we invite students from all parts of the world to be with us, because what we're finding is it not only supports our students from other parts of the world who come to study here, but it also impacts our students here who have opportunities to engage. Again, our school communities are so diverse, they're so rich in diversity, that it simply enhances that. So it's a program that is strong, and we continue to plan to keep it strong.
I don't have anything to add. That seems
Okay.
very
Well, and I don't know if you have,
all-encompassing.
I don't know how many schools you have in your area, but I do know as well when they talk about limiting. The fact is, international students are going to schools that have room.
Absolutely.
That's the whole concept of it.
Yeah.
Where we have room, you know, and people want to come to Toronto and learn at the TDSB. It makes sense. Perfect opportunity. Next up from Chris, in what ways will teachers learn to implement universal design for learning and differentiated instruction?
I'm giving that to John.
So one of the things that I believe is the greatest equity. So we talk about equity, but I'm going to connect equity to the classroom. The greatest equity is that we know each and every student in the classroom. We understand the student's strengths, interests, and needs. Notice how I put those in a certain order? Oftentimes we flip it the other way around, but each student brings strengths to the table, and that is our starting point. And the instructional practices and the assessment has to be in connection to those strengths, interests, and needs. Growing Success is a policy document from our ministry that I believe speaks to this equity. And Learning for All is another provincial document that speaks to how we are to engage each and every learner. Effective instruction, effective assessment is doing what I'm discussing. So what I'm suggesting then is that every learning opportunity that we provide, whether it's in math or whether it's in global competencies or some other form of instruction, needs to keep in mind universal design, assessment, and inclusion, so that each and every one of our students has the opportunity to show their learning in diverse and varied ways. For example, some of our students are much better able to communicate their knowledge and their skill in an area, and they may struggle with writing. Now, we want to raise the bar on all areas in terms of instruction, but if the only way that assessment happens is through writing, for example, that may lead a teacher to believe that the student is not meeting the expectations. And that's the reason why we need a differentiated approach, is what educators call it, which means we're focusing on each and every student. We need universal design, which starts from the strengths of the students and works from there. And we need varied forms of assessment so students can show us their ability to meet expectations in a variety of ways. But this is the foundation of all effective practice, which means it's the foundation of every learning experience that exists, regardless of the focus area.
Thank you for that question. Next up, from Al. There's been a big move to offer technology in the classroom. Is the province providing funding to allow all children in K-12 to have computers in the classroom? Do they all get tablets or laptops?
So why don't I start with an instructional
Okay,
piece,
go
and
for
then
an
you can
instructional
speak to the
piece.
funding
Okay,
piece. Is
I'll
that okay?
try. Sure.
So we can always use more resources. We can always use more technology. But I'm going to actually ask if I can shift the conversation for a brief minute. If we don't change the instruction in the classroom, that piece of technology is a more expensive encyclopedia or textbook. And I want to be really clear about that. What we're striving for in our classrooms is helping our students think, create, problem solve, collaborate, and communicate effectively. We're trying to support our students to become great citizens and global citizens, which includes virtual citizens, because as we know, especially our younger people are very connected to things like technology, the internet, and so forth. That's the kind of learning we're trying to create. And yes, that kind of learning, those kinds of learning opportunities, is supported by technology. But this is the challenge. We cannot continue to spend resource dollars on all the things that we've spent resource dollars on for many, many decades, such as paper-based textbooks, workbooks, photocopying, and the like. And by the way, I'm not suggesting I'm anti-books, because I do believe in the importance of the printed word.
Oh, good.
But I do think we have to go through some challenging discussions, because if all of our budget dollars are used on those types of resources, we will not have the dollars for the digital or the technological resources. Some of our schools have already made decisions to do that in their school community. So where I'll summarize is this. We are working with our staffs to transform instruction so that the kind of learning opportunities reflect what I suggested. Then we're looking at what resources are required to fulfill the expectations of that kind of instruction. And those resources do include technology and other digital resources. And then we're looking at our budgets to see where it is that we can shift our spending or where it is that we may not have enough. And to that end, as the chair has suggested earlier, we do turn to our provincial government who provides funding. So in terms of the funding side of things, Robin, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I think that we have to keep in mind that the funding at this point is finite. So the things John is talking about, looking at different ways of instruction and how we're spending the money and whether that's the right way to be spending it is very important, because there is, at this point, no more money. And we have to be careful. I think parents raise a lot of money for technology. As we know, we've heard lots of stuff about fundraising, and technology seems to be one of the areas people raise money in their schools. And I think it's important to make sure that that stuff is being, that equipment is being used appropriately,
Right.
too, because otherwise we just have a lot of equipment that's not being used. Schools appear to be better off than other schools, and that's not appropriate either. So there is issues around that, I think, that are quite serious.
And one of the things, or a couple of things that we're paying attention to, is that instead, we want to move away from some schools having a lot of access
Yeah.
and other schools not having much access at all. So what we're doing is we are working through our wireless challenges, and within the next year, all of our schools will be effectively wireless with the appropriate highway. That's what I call it. That's what my technology friends tell me it's called. And we know that right now that's not the case. So that's one thing we're doing systemically, and that's going to be solved within the year. We're also supporting what we call digital lead learners at all of our schools. Those are teachers on staff who have a real interest and passion to change instruction in the way I've just described, and through their leadership that we will support, others on staff can also be supported to make that happen. And then we're going to look at the whole notion of equity, who has access, who doesn't, and how we use our system dollars to support those communities where they may not have the same access as other communities as in terms of computers, tablets, and the like. But one of the things we are also paying attention to is everyone may not at all times need the one-to-one tablet.
Right.
May not. But we certainly need to have access to these types of tools in the classroom, because they are tools, they are not the focus, and it's through those tools that the real learning can happen, as long as the instruction leads kids to be able to do the kinds of thinking and creating that I mentioned previously.
Well, and you touched on this, but it is already happening. Like, I've been to a number
Yes.
of schools where you literally have a complete set, a cart of iPads. And it's going, like our model schools, for example, with grade ones, there's iPad sets for grade ones in our model schools that, from what I can see, there's some great math apps on it, and they really do get involved. It's used for special education, but it is already starting to roll out. But as you can appreciate, with, I would assume, with 246,000 students at 584 different sites, it can be a bit slower to fully roll something like that out.
And I think we also have to pay attention to a couple of other key things. For instance, our students with special needs who may benefit from technology are in a much more inclusive place when other students have the same ability to use that technology. It's just part of what goes on in that particular classroom. Another example that I'm sure many of our parents can relate to is we've got to do a really effective job, both at school and in partnership with you, regarding how to teach our students to use technology effectively. We know that some of our
Safely.
students are having a hard time putting the screen down. And I'm guessing at home, you're seeing some of your children not choosing to play outside or to engage with family or friends because they're so connected to that latest game. That's part of that citizenship I spoke about. We want to be sure that the technology is supporting learning. It's the world we live in. We live in a physical now and digital world. It's not just physical. And our job as schools, working with you, our families, is to be sure that our students can live effectively in this physical and digital world, which sometimes means teaching them to put it down so that they can engage in other kinds of discussion and relationships.
I have to be reminded of that sometimes.
Yes.
Here's the burning question, technology related. When is Snapchat and Instagram coming back?
I'm
think-
going to get my phone out now.
Yeah. So we're look, and I think I remember this at the time. The fact is, our systems, as John was saying, there are some systems that are on, quite frankly, a slower internet that we're now upgrading. But there were times when these programs were literally clogging the system, and actual important school information wasn't getting to and from people because Instagram was filling it up.
Well, and frankly, the school system has to prioritize, and it's not Instagram.
Yeah,
Much
so
as I
and-
like Instagram, don't kid yourself, and Snapchat, but you have to prioritize, and people have to make decisions, and the bandwidth just isn't there to support those things at critical
Right.
times of the year.
And I think that we've named that we have had a challenge that we're fixing. And we have the plan to fix that. And again, for all of you who are in schools that are not getting the type of connection that is required, I do apologize. We're working on it as quickly as we can, and we do have an end date for that. But I have to put my own bias on the table. I actually believe, and I know some of the parents might not agree with me, that in essence, we need our students to be able to go to those sites as long as we teach them what appropriate is. That stopping that actually doesn't necessarily teach the kind of discipline that might be required.
No, all it teaches is a way to get around it, to still get
That's
on the
right.
site.
And so we aren't really in 2017 and beyond wishing to get into this notion of what we are turning off or turning on or what filter we're using. We do have filters, by the way, but what we're simply saying is those particular tools, Snapchat and Instagram, aren't being used right now because of the issue of needing to have
No,
enough bandwidth
you
and
have to
prioritize.
prioritize.
We're not planning to stay there, to the dismay of some of our families who like this, but we are committed to working with you, our parents, to be sure that we're supporting our children to be healthy in this space that we're in.
Perfect, good question. Next up, we have a question. Are there any school systems around the world you feel that you could use as a model to improve results for marginalized students here at the TDSB? Is there one that kind of comes to mind? Like I know many people look to the TDSB just given the size. We're in one of the most diverse countries /
The
cities
information we
in the
collect
world.
on our students, and the
Exactly.
information we have about our student populations, which is, second to none.
Yeah, I would say that because we collect the data that tells us how our students are doing by demographic groups, because we're willing to name places
that
where
data.
change is required, because our data is the data that's used all over the place
Right.
to say how we're doing, and then decisions might be made about other places, and the province is examining the potential of moving beyond in terms of the gathering
Yeah.
of data. I actually think that we are well positioned to continue this really important work, to close gaps, to provide the right resources and opportunities, and to challenge barriers. So it's not that we can't learn from others, because we're always open to learning, but as you say, because of our diversity, because of our size, we certainly are part of networks where we do have the ability to connect with some of the larger school districts in the States, for example. But again, we're the 6th or 7th largest in the entire North American continent. And there isn't any school board within Canada that is even remotely close to who we are. And so it makes it difficult to sometimes have those learning opportunities when we really don't reflect each other's experiences all that well. Having said that, we're open for learning anytime, anywhere.
But even compared to some of those larger boards, we have more information on our students.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's, if anyone is seeing, in many cases, if
Hopefully you
anyone...
did your census.
Yeah, if anyone is seeing information about TDSB students or marginalized students or this group is overrepresented from this group and that kind of thing, it's because of our information in many cases. That's not an outside group. Typically, that is based on the information that the TDSB collects, because in the end, we want to know this. It's not,
Right.
you know...
Well, for example, Ryan, Carl James from York University, Dr. Carl James, just completed a study about 2 months ago, which spoke to how there are gaps with how some of our black students are achieving. And that certainly was discussion at the board,
Absolutely.
discussion with our community, and that's continuing. But again, he writes right in the beginning of that report that the fact that he could do this work with us is because of the data we collect. And at this point, other boards haven't chosen to do that in the same way, which is why their boards cannot be with us, if you will, in the public discourse. Having said that, our board is committed. I'm grateful for that.
Absolutely.
Our staff is working with the information. We know that sometimes we lose the trust of our communities because, again, we aren't moving fast enough. But I think what I find in the year and a half I've been with the board is the Board of Trustees is committed and providing clear direction to staff. Staff is quite committed, providing clear direction with all of our schools. And the other thing I'm appreciating is that our communities, through many different means, community advisories and other opportunities, are sharing with us what it is that they would like for us to consider, which is why the Enhancing Equity Task Force, which has involved thousands of people actually,
Yeah, thousands.
both virtually and in meetings, and there's still more to come, are providing us with great and rich insights that we're going to use, and our board is going to
Committed to that.
tackle, I guess, the importance of the recommendations in November.
That's right. We're starting to look at them. We'll get them in November. We've been doing the board itself has been doing some homework looking at where we're spending our current money, because to put many of these recommendations, it's going to require a cost. These aren't free.
Right.
And some decisions will have to be made because, like I said earlier, there is a finite amount of money. So the board has been doing some work, so they're ready to make some of these decisions and look at how we can roll out some of these changes we're hoping will help students and their achievement.
Perfect. Thank you for that question. Next up from Vivian. She talks about, we'll send this to you, Robin, a Toronto Star columnist, and no pressure, has said we should get rid of school trustees.
I know who that is.
But to talk to you about kind of the role of trustees and what you guys do for the people of Toronto.
So I think that my observation in my role of trustee for my local community has been to be like an air traffic controller. The TDSB is a big airplane, and sometimes people can't get to where they need to be. So I think my role has a lot to do locally with helping people, you know, when they have an issue, helping them get to the right person. I may not be able to solve the issue because, you know, there is a line between governance, which is what trustees are responsible for, and operations, which what John is responsible for. And it's not, never the two shall meet, mostly. So I think that that's an important role. And I know that the column that the individual is referring to, I'm not sure how taking out local representation would make the system more responsive to people. And I see my role is to help people make their way through the system. The other thing is that you hear things in the community, issues that are important, and you can see how the board is relating to those and whether there's things that we need to raise at a board level and discuss with the director and senior staff around systemic issues that keep occurring. And those things, I mean, we have been talking about anti-Black racism at the board level and at a staff level, and those kind of things are important, and that helps give the impetus to move these things forward in a way that might be difficult otherwise.
And if I could just add,
Yeah.
from a staff perspective, one of the things that I've learned in the 18 months I've been in the Toronto District School Board is how deeply diverse our community's views are. And the passion behind the diversity of those views. And the desire for the board to hear, listen, and respond. If staff did not have the governance of the board to actually engage each trustee's own community, bring that experience to a board table where 22 elected officials are basically making policy direction that allows staff then to implement. If we did not have the ability for the board to collectively help staff understand the direction we need to head in, it would be really, really challenging because, again, I'm sure that you read the newspapers. I'm sure you understand in your communities. There are so many issues facing our school board and our communities right now that frankly people don't agree on. And one of the most challenging, and I would suggest staff is very grateful, I hope our communities are as well, roles that the trustees play is to think about all that, listen to all that, and make decisions around that. And to me, it's a great example of the democratic process, specifically serving students. That's my thought from a staff perspective. I don't know if that resonates with your experience.
Yeah, and I think that representing your community means different things to many people. It doesn't necessarily mean that your trustee will do exactly what you say when you send them an email. But I think that having somebody who can help you work yourself through that system to bring your view back to the board about issues that are important in the community is important.
That's great. Thank you for that question. If you're just joining us, we are coming closer to the end of our webcast tonight. We are here with Director of Education John Malloy and Chair Robin Pilkey. We still do have some time for a last few questions, though, so if you do have some, please get them in. We're going to Mary now. Busing for my kids was terrible last September and October. I think you guys heard about that.
Yes.
What's the plan to improve come this September? You know, I do know that just in talking with our transportation people, and we'll be getting into this, as far as increasing that communication between parents, and we're getting ready to be able to have parents sign up for email alerts to be notified about
portable,
delays.
I understand, portable that will be able to tell you where the bus is and things like that.
And down the road, we're eventually, GPS will be on our buses. So you
moving more and
now,
more into that.
This is not going to be ready in time for September, but
Parts of it
we are exactly, we are pushing as fast as we can to actually get real-time tracking of buses. And I do know that the communication, and maybe John can speak of this, but the communication between us and the transportation companies has increased significantly, I think, and really prepare, not only now, but over the summer as well, leading right up to the first day of school, to alleviate any of those concerns.
Right. So I would say that, very briefly, it's important for our community to know that we are a part of a transportation consortium. That consortium serves the Toronto District School Board and the Toronto Catholic District School Board.
Can I interrupt? That means we share buses.
We share buses. That's it.
We share buses.
The work of the consortium is to be the connection to the operators. So there are a couple things happening. Our consortium continues to work hard at this. Our staff, working with the consortium and the Catholic Board, have been exceptionally involved. We have really paid attention to the communication piece. In other words, even if we have a challenge that seems to be really difficult to solve, we need to be sure that our families have way more notice to work with us in that regard. Having said that, we've been working diligently to manage some of the challenges that exist. I mean, there are challenges as it relates to having enough bus drivers across the province. There are issues in terms of the very busy streets, especially in a place like Toronto and other parts of the GTA. And again, not making excuses, these are realities we have to pay attention to while we're dealing with the complex situation called busing. So we have been working hard all year. We have been given a lot of confidence that the very challenging difficulties that we are apologizing for wherever we go don't happen again. And that is our plan. But bottom line, even if there was to be something that was to be outside of our control, effective and timely communication is also key.
Absolutely. A question from Abdi. He says, the school resource officer at my school, C.W. Jeffries, is amazing, and I agree with Principal Gala that the officer makes a positive difference in our school. Now I'm hearing the police board wants to cancel the SRO program. What's going to happen? From the school board perspective, John, do you want to start off kind of where we stand on the SRO or school resource officer program?
So I'll share with you the recommendation that staff has brought to our board, and then the chair can make a comment. So let me start by saying this is a very complex issue. Remember before I talked about how diverse some of the issues are in our community? This is one of them. For people who don't know, our school resource officers are our police in our schools. And we have 45 schools in the Toronto District School Board where our police would be at school each and every day. There are some of our communities that have communicated, like C.W. Jeffries, that this is a very significant resource, one that we should continue. There are some within our community that feel that it is not, an effective resource and that it sends a message which we wouldn't want to send to our students around the criminalization is the word that's used of schools that might be connected to issues of racism and other challenges that are connected there. So we really do have a distinct and important challenge to work through. The Police Services Board I can't comment on because that is a unique body that is listening to the community, and there is a motion that's being considered. How they will consider it, what time frame they're going to use is frankly outside of our purview. But what I can say is the TDSB approach. In light of the fact that we have effective partnerships with our police, and I want to state that clearly, and we also are very willing to listen to our diverse voices in our communities, we are at a place where I have recommended to the board that we take a month to 6 weeks in the new school year, because as you may know, and I'm guessing you know, because your students, especially if they're in high school, are getting ready for exams, we're at a stage of the year where it becomes really hard to engage right now. So we've made a commitment that between the middle of September and the end of October, we want to speak to our students, our families, and our staff in those 45 communities, not to review the program for its merits or to evaluate the program, but to specifically listen to the voice of experience that our students, our families, and our staff have as it relates to this program. We also know we have to create different ways for us to gain this information, because some of our community members have shared with us that maybe our students or families wouldn't feel comfortable sharing very, very difficult experiences. So what we're saying as a Toronto District School Board is we understand the complexity, we get the diversity of this and the differing views that exist. Student safety is key. Creating safe environments that are free from racism, for example, are paramount. And we feel that the responsible thing to do is to give a very focused amount of time for us to learn what our communities have to say. One last comment that I want to put on the table, because some of the people who have contacted us believe that we already have enough data that the program should be stopped, or we already have enough data that the program should be continued. I need to say respectfully that we, from a TDSB perspective, feel that we need a bit more of that engagement so that we're ensuring that we are capturing the voices that we need to hear as we make potentially a decision down the road. So that's why staff raised the recommendation to the board, and we communicated that this is the operational stance we wanted to take. Chair, maybe you have some additional thoughts.
So many people have come to various committee meetings to discuss the SRO issue. There is obviously a lot of strong feelings about this both ways. The board, and even on the Board of Trustees, I have to be honest, there are people who feel both sides of the issue. Like our communities, we're also very split, I think, on decisions about this. So I think it's important, and the board has expressed this as well, even with these diverse opinions, that the director bringing back a report kind of to give us a bit more perspective and to hear from community members, because I think that me sitting where I am as the chair of the board is not the best person to say yes or no to this at this point. I don't know enough information about this, and I think that we need to respect the people's voices on this issue. It's very important to talk to the community, talk to students, talk to their families, if we want to make a decision that's authentic, I think.
Right.
Thank you, Abdi, for that a very important question. We have a question from Charlie. I appreciate the focus on mental health for our kids. How is the TDSB targeting this issue?
Well, there are a couple of things. One is well-being is a part of our vision for learning and our strategic work. Well-being is a broad definition to ensure that our kids are healthy, that our kids are resilient and confident and optimistic. In fact, we had a webinar on mental health just last month. So we really are focusing on how do we help educators understand what is in our purview as it relates to creating classroom environments that support positive mental health. You don't need to be a doctor, a psychologist, a social worker to provide opportunities for students to really be stronger and healthier in our schools. So that's one piece. Secondly, we are very fortunate to have wonderful personnel in our TDSB, like social workers and psychologists, to name two, but there are many more. And when the school community needs additional supports, we turn to our staff. Thirdly, because I don't want to imply that we have enough staff to meet all the needs, as many of you probably know, there are resources through our community agencies that also assist us. So our commitment is to the mental health of all. Within that, we focus on what classroom teachers and other staff are doing to support that kind of involvement. We're also becoming, I think, more effective at partnering with our families naming when challenges exist, and drawing upon other staff resources both within our own board and beyond to target this important issue.
Well, and it's not just even like, yes, there are the trained professionals, the counselors, the psychologists and stuff like that, but sometimes it's just someone to talk to.
Well, we've written right into our expectations to our schools
gonna mention
that each and every student needs a caring adult. And how do you know that each and every student has a caring adult? Because the last census said to us that approximately 36% of our students didn't know if they had a caring adult. And we also know that if our students don't feel a sense of belonging, a few friends that are really significant, that's also going to impact this. So, you know, sometimes we do go to the really challenging pieces that are outside of our expertise when, in essence, ensuring that kids, students, your children have an opportunity to develop positive relationships and have a caring adult who's looking after that is taking us very far down the road of that question.
What I was going to say was also that some of the goals that the director has put in place for schools, one of them is a well-being and mental health
That's
goal.
right.
Each school is, and again, this goes back to what I said earlier, that what's appropriate for one school is not necessarily appropriate for the next school, and those
Right.
goals have been set at schools. So your local school, if you were to ask your principal, they would be able to tell you what
Right.
their mental health and well-being goal for their school
And
will
thanks
be.
for that, because that's
know,
that's foundational to our whole
right.
school improvement process.
The school, yeah.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
one of the goals.
Thank you for that question. We are unfortunately coming to the end of our webcast right now. We apologize if we were not able to get to all of your questions. Of course, you'll see on the screen if you do have any of those school-specific or very detailed-oriented questions, please, you can follow up with the parent concern protocol, which essentially starts with teacher and then the administrators at the school to superintendent and trustees. Just before we go, we'll go to get some closing words from both Robin and John. Robin, do you have any closing words? And I also want you to touch on how parents can get involved, because especially
Funny, I was going to say that.
Okay, good.
So I would like to thank everybody who came out tonight and took the time to write and listen, and maybe we'll watch this again on a replay. If you are interested in being involved in your school, there's always your school council, which has elections should have elections in September. Opportunities to be involved at that level. As well, the board has a parent involvement advisory committee, and that actually is looking at issues on a bigger level for the school board and how parents can help and how parents can be involved and parents' opinions about what's going on at the schools, and it's very important. So if you have any interest in that, there's also PIAC, they're on our website, PIAC. So that is important, and many people start out as school council chairs and school council members. I myself was one for many years, and you really have a chance to understand what's going on in your child's school, to speak to your principal, and hear people's different opinions, and I think it's a great opportunity, so I encourage people to do that.
Perfect. Thank you, Robin. John, any closing thoughts?
Thanks, Ryan, and I appreciate these opportunities. I know that this is not a face-to-face connection that the chair and I are having with you, but it certainly gives us an opportunity to listen to some questions, to share some reflections. But we know that there's much more that we need to do to support you, your children, and our schools. And so that's why I want to clarify two things. One, our Learning Center model is intending to help us be more responsive. And you said it so well, Ryan, that we still expect the majority of issues to be dealt with at school. And of course, Robin, you said earlier how the trustee helps navigate that, which we appreciate. But I want to be really clear, because I've received a number of questions about, well, what is the process if the issue bubbles up over the school? In other words, I still have a concern even though I've worked with the teacher and the principal. So of course, you may engage your trustee, and that's always wonderful. The trustee works closely with the superintendent. And the superintendent is pivotal into the work we're doing. But then someone says, well, if we still have a challenge, I want to be clear about this. Each and every learning center has an executive superintendent. That executive superintendent is responsible for 7 superintendents working with your children's school. We would like the executive superintendent to help working with the trustee to navigate the system. In other words, we don't need you to try to find somebody who works at system level, waiting for a phone call, waiting for an email. We would ask that if you still need support, you start with your superintendent. We expect a quick turnaround in terms of their response, and then to go to the executive superintendent if further mediation is required. So again, I'm going to offer that really direct suggestion, because I'm still hearing from time to time that people don't know where to go. And the executive team, just so you're aware, meets every week, and the senior team meets every week. So thank you for the opportunity to spend this time with you, and I'll just close by saying, Our students, your children, will not be successful unless we can work together effectively. The greatest relationships, as I said earlier, happen at school, but we as a system called TDSB needs to support those effective and healthy relationships each and every day. And it's a privilege to work with you, our parents and guardians, in the work that we are doing together.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight, at least from a webcast perspective. We will not see you until the next school year, so please
Have a great
have
summer.
a safe
Have a great
and happy
summer.
summer. My sincere thanks and all of our thanks to everyone behind the scenes that made tonight possible. Have a great evening.
Night.
Good night.